So I will talk on behalf of Decolonizing Architecture Advanced course. We are an interdisciplinary group formed by artists, architects, curators, and researchers. And the course is led by Alessandro Petti and Elof Hellstrom. We will present what we have been discussing in the course until then, and afterwards we wish to discuss our ongoing research on themes related to heritage and migrations that we will develop during the spring term of the course. We investigate how heritage can be comprehensive instead of excluding certain identities and cultures, and how the acknowledgement of a contentious heritage can contribute to understand recent stories of migration. So during the autumn semester, we built a common ground of understanding while we share our thoughts through meetings, readings, and site visits. So architectural space is a product of social and political interaction. Colonial architecture particularly revealed how space embeds political agendas and power dynamics. In the process of decolonizing, we ask how architecture can play its role and be reused, reshaped, and rethought and redirected towards a just and equal society. So does the fact that mainstream architectural standards are usually one-dimensional respond to specific interests? And who has the power to influence the standards? So in our discussions, the term decolonization is applied beyond architecture, and it's open to comprehend current conditions of minorities' oppressions and domination, as well as situation of migration and exile. Based on the experience of campus in camps and the tree school brought by Alessandro Spetti research, we deliberated two different forms of knowledge production. We question educational institution legibility as the only depository of knowledge, and we explore horizontal forms of exchange, a process of decolonizing the mind. Our learning experience to rethink the power dynamics in our world today. Being a multilingual group, language granted us power and mechanisms to travel to their own learning process. Language, also as an example of a common heritage, fitted us to wonder about commons and the dichotomy between public and private. So we have been framing our discussions around these three questions. What is heritage? And who decides what needs to be considered heritage and in which frame? Then, is architecture a form of politics? Is there a relationship between concrete political systems and architectural forms? Is it possible to break the dichotomy between public and private space and to create a common space? Recognizing that architecture plays a crucial role in organizing spatial relations and expressing ideologies, we attempt to interrogate and challenge the established orders of things and reflect how architecture can act as a form of political intervention. We end the first semester of the course with a discursive exhibition at the Royal Institute of Art called Decolonizing North. Decolonizing North was a conference held within an exhibition. Through a series of on-site interventions, the audience of the conference was invited to rethink the traditional format of knowledge production and the powers relation at academic conference. Conference content was aligned with the exhibition space, allowing space to take part in the discussion. After the conference, we did a research visit to Palermo, and then this presentation now will be about this research in Palermo. The research visit conveyed the topics discussed in the first semester. We collectively decided what to visit and made the contacts with local artists, activists, local community, and authorities. Palermo, as a study site, offers provocative thoughts in relation to migration and heritage. So you can see Palermo in the map, and Due to its central position in the Mediterranean Sea, it has been a crossroad of cultures and peoples that left consistent traces in the artists and architectural assets of the city. In Palermo, heritage and migration are two sides of the same coin. The inscription of 7 sites of the city in the UNESCO World Heritage List is due to the encounter between two cultures that gave birth to the Arab norm style, a unique architectural and artistic form produced by the dialogue between Arabs and norms. So this is one of the churches that we visit, that the ceiling is in mosaic, representing the norms, and then you have a baroque in the other part of the ceiling of the same church. So our entry point to Palermo was the UNESCO heritage and the Arab norm architecture. The map shows the monuments that we visit, and the mixing of culture is part of the history of the city and something to be preserved. But has it become the dominant narrative of the city? We asked ourselves, what are the counter-narratives of Palermo that are not being told? Sicily still maintains its role as a crossroad of cultures. In the recent history, from the late 60s onwards, the island has experienced considerable flux of migration that in Palermo left trace in the demographic urban environment. Building upon this migrant heritage, and in order to challenge the discrimination of the Italian European authorities towards migration regarding border security, the mayor of Palermo released a document that expressed the need to reconsider the approach towards citizenship and migration, proposing the right to mobility as a fundamental human right. The Charter of Palermo, as it is named, was released in 2015, proposing the abolition of resident permit to relieve the emergency state of migration on Mediterranean countries and also in Europe. The document underscores migrant as a person with legible human rights. In Palermo in 2018, we host Manifest 12. It's a European Nomad Art Biennale. And also in 2019, Palermo was nominated the Italian Capital of Culture. So it is in this context and moment that the final outcome of our research will be presented. UNESCO heritage gives legitimation to a specific identity, in this case, the multicultural historic city. For this heritage identity to resurface, others has to be erased. So we continue our research to the other important elements that constitute the quality of Palermo, but are not legitimized by the UNESCO. So between 1848 and 1866, the Kingdom of Sardinia fought 3 wars, unifying a larger proportion of the territory that nowadays forms Italy. After the end of the third and last independence war, in 1966, a new law comes to relieve the economic recession, the reversion of the ecclesiastic access. So the Italian state confiscate buildings owned by the Catholic Church and put them under the administration of municipalities. In Palermo, church, monasteries, and sacred buildings were confiscated and secularized. Nowadays, the state can't deal with such large number of protected buildings, so many are abandoned and in ruins. Churches were used as granaries, garages, and gardens, but now part of this contingent are empty. In addition, Palermo was heavily bombed during World War II, and the ruins are still part of the urban environment of the city. So these pictures show a part of the town that has been bombed in 1943. From abandoned architecture and ruins, the city center of Palermo has a collection of vacant buildings. The unoccupied city center and its degradation is part of the identity of Palermo. Between roofless church and empty shops in an old arcade in Palermo, the city moves around, a city that has been mutilated during past and present times. We visit some of those buildings. It's much more than is in the map, but these are the ones that we visit. So we visit some of them from the outside, and the ones that were occupied, squatted, we managed to visit from the inside. Among art gallery, artist studio, squatted house, we identified different intentions and ways of occupying those spaces. The research intends to investigate the different uses of the abandoned buildings heritage of Palermo. What are the possible mechanisms to bring the abandoned building to life and still preserve the identity of Palermo? With a lot of free assets available, and especially after the city branding campaign over Palermo with the UNESCO nomination and the Art Biennale Manifesta and Palermo as capital of culture, the city could be seen at risk of capitalism appropriation. We asked if there is a heritage of abandonment to be preserved to avoid gentrification, or what kind of use of that heritage would benefit the inhabitants of Palermo. Another level of abandon was experienced when we visit Casa del Mutilato. It's the house of the Italian Association of War Invalids. So on May 5th, 1936, Benito Mussolini announced to Italian citizens and the world the conquest of Ethiopia and the creation of the Italian Empire. He says, "Our Victoria troops enter Addis Ababa. I announce to Italian people and to the world that the war is finished and the peace is reestablished." In the same year, 1936, Mussolini was in Palermo inaugurating this monumental fascist architecture to honor those who fight for the Italian Empire. While church has been secularized, Casa del Mutilato, on the other end, were sacralized by the war. The atrium entrance frames and guide you towards an altar where inscription of every Italian battle worship the man that made the empire possible. The building speaks through its column, its white marble, its inscriptions on the walls. It narrates the victories and sacrifice of Italian soldiers and nothing else. With undoubted effectiveness, it is shown how the secular religion of fascism has used architecture to celebrate the culture of the Littoria and to impress a political faith in the people. So the building brings the Italian fascism's heritage into question. What does this symbol of fascism mean in the city today? Can we light up what is the legacy of the Italian Empire and how does it relate to the current migration in Italy? So a fascist architecture was used as political instruments to show power of the state and, according to Mussolini, also to establish peace.
Okay, so within this context of problematizing UNESCO heritage as a kind of status quo narrative, some of us have been working on a notion that we called queer heritage. Why? Because we've, like as I said, been problematizing this idea of heritage as a collective lived fiction of a specific cultural value, which in this case is attached to the, well, we saw before the Casa del Mutilato, specific architectural value, but that obviously implies other histories to be erased. So in that way, Casa del Mutilato could be seen as being modern architecture. It's a monument, sculpture of war that relates to men soldiers only, actually, of the Italian fascist states, So this kind of former status quo of the national body. So it's a heritage maker in a way, and in this way it leaves out bodies, other bodies, and histories from women's wombs, which obviously aid and are essential to the reproduction of that Italian state body, to sexual minorities, and colonized minorities. Everything is left out of that national history. So how do we apply this sort of contradiction in these kind of heritage questions of fascists on one side and sexual minority to the other side? How do we place that in space, and how can we go about in investigating them? And of course, this is an ongoing quest, so we don't have any results yet, but we think it's really interesting in a way to contextualize this queer heritage of the city, all of these histories of sexual minorities which remain largely invisible and sort of, dug underneath the surface. How do we contextualize them in a building where, we have this fascist heritage which now has become national heritage and war heritage, and that's the kind of official narrative that, it's history, it's Italian history, it's war, etc. So in a way, in exploring queer heritage in Palermo and placing it by the way of an activity, or we don't know yet what it will be, but in a sort of curatorial way, placing it within this Casa del Mutilato, we're looking at unpicking those erasures. So in a way, it is also a kind of a hard task of this archive making that you guys were mentioning before, because we're kind of trying to create a narrative that is present in the city of people living and dying, in this case queers, but whose history remains completely sort of unimportant, irrelevant, invisible, and sort of every time that someone else is born, they need to start all over again. And then when they die, things are left behind and forgotten. So in this way, we've been, I guess, looking at erecting some sort of counter monumentality or queer monumentality and to place it there. So struggles around criminalization, of course, during the fascist years, exile, displacement, censorship are all words that are coming up in this quest. And in a way, they unpick the ways in which the fascist heritage on one side and the queer heritage, they function as complementary modes of hiding, and they reinforce the narrative, the UNESCO narrative, the status quo. So in order to get more concrete and maybe familiarize ourselves with what is actually going on in Palermo, what could be interesting for us, we had two meetings. One of them was with the Sicilia Queer Film Festival. And the other one was this is a Libreria Altro Quando, also known as Biblioteca Salvatore Rizzuto. So first of all, we met the guys of the Sicilia Queer Film Festival. They play a really important role because they provide an overview of international film production. They're super experimental, but they also establish a dialogue in the city and internationally with cutting-edge filmmakers and theorists in ways that Stockholm doesn't have, honestly. They're very, very, very potent. So they also do a summer school in cooperation with the university, and they sort of produce various contexts of knowledge production. And the festival prize is named after the poet, actor, director, and political and cultural activist Nino Gennaro, who also died of AIDS in 1995. So there's a lot of, in a way, history that is sort of claimed or reclaimed through this festival. And the second, which is the Fumetteria, this library, it could also be seen as a visit to a living but also precarious monument to another brave man, Salvatore Rizzuto. He was an activist. He was gay, and he escaped in the 70s the army. He refused the compulsory military service, and instead he escaped to the Netherlands. And then he eventually came back and founded Libreria Alto Quando in the 90s, which was a fumetteria, so a comic bookshop, which at the time was super new in Palermo. But also, so as well as being a sort of self-produced, self-managed space, they became a place for listening. They became a kind of informal sort of reunion space for the whole queer community in Palermo. And we met his partner, Filippo. And he's keeping this place as a memorial almost, but also they keep doing, they have a totally transversal progressive agenda. So you would think that, oh, you know, it's very specific, that the only thing they do is specializing in bare gay culture, but no, they're really super transversal. They're super involved in all the refugee struggles as well. So in a way, this is an ongoing process, but we would definitely like to be talking to them and in a way erect, so to speak, these fragile monuments of heritage that perhaps could be more useful for us. So in a way, a form of resistance.
And then also, the site visit also include a visit to the peripheral neighborhood known as Zen 2, a modernist project for social housing built in the 70s by the architect Vittorio Gregotti. It is Palermo's and in fact one of Italy's most criticized public housing projects. The project was built with the purpose of stopping the uncontrollable extension of the city, together with the social problems it brings with. The blocks imitate the traditional old city center and promise public facilities, but the project remained unfinished and the communal facilities never were built. Over the years, it has become a real open-air town. As one of Italy's most stigmatized neighborhoods, how can we understand the architectural responsibility in it? How does a displaced community live together in a space that was created for an imposed architectural ideology? Which are the tools that we use in order to intervene in a space and create their own heritage? And actually, which is the role of the private into this public space? What kind of heritage does the Zen represent for Palermo? So, just to sum up a little bit, our research will cover contentious heritage of Palermo, putting an eye on Palermo's controversial, provoking, and uneasy heritage, challenges the UNESCO seal as the only important narrative of Palermo to be preserved. We will put our interest in common and what intrigued us in our first visit: fascist heritage, minority and queer heritage, abandoned heritage, and the modernist public housing program Zen. As we are at the beginning of our process, as we said, the final outcome is still to be decided. Being conscious of our limitations, both in terms of spatial intervention and connection to the local struggles, the research could develop as a spatial intervention while discussing fascist and abandoned heritage. For queer heritage and the public housing program Zen, our aim is to use this research to find a methodology that is coherent with the terms and the questions emerged during the course, in order to open up a conversation with local entities on the topic of heritage. This research will be held and present as a summer school at the opening week of the Manifesto 12 from the 16th until the 23rd of June. We intend to propose a discursive exhibition in the same mode as we present in Decolonizing the North, where the space is part of the debate and provokes a new layer of interaction with the topic discussed. So that's mainly our research trip that we did, and we are trying to move on.
Well, one question is: have these three examples sum up the entirety of all the explorations going on in the class, or are these more or less the three themes you guys are going to be exploring?
Yeah, four.
Four.
Yeah, it's the fascist heritage, the abandoned heritage, the queer
And the modern.
heritage, and the modernism public house, Zen. It's called Zen. That is a zone.
Zonas de expansión enorme.
Yes.
Yeah, because in Naples it's called the Ver. That's another troublesome neighborhood. It's just very rich with possibilities, and I'm just wondering whether I was looking at how the mapping could begin to overlap, so that you start to kind of coordinate more of this information along with the same, within the same material. Because I for example, you could pull off the fascist buildings from this period, the abandoned squatter houses, everything could be layered in the same information. Because in some ways I would like to know how some things are supporting others.
Exactly, that's the whole point. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Have you, or maybe we'll take this later to start to discuss how this kind of methodology, mental approach can be transferred into a Swedish context? And I'm making that question because Palermo is a nation city with a lot of intensive layers conflicting each other. I mean, it's easy to guide yourself around that kind of space, but in a Swedish space, notice that this country has not been in war in 200 years, but we still need this kind of approach. But how do we orient ourselves? And I think it was interesting in the very beginning when you say decolonizing the north, and you start to with the space where we did it. It's an interesting start. But again, I would like you guys to come back here again to the north. Do not forget us.
No.
But I guess, when we were in Palermo, we were discussing the fact that, and the reason why this kind of fascist heritage concept, I think, came about is because fascism is a very European thing that we have. So I think it, in a way, is a collective endeavor. We don't want to sort of say this is only about Italy, but it's so, in a way, in exploring things in Italy, we can come to, perhaps, we don't know how, but the idea is definitely to create a dialogue with the north of Europe. And in the question of queer heritage, it's also because in a way it's minority heritage, and yes, they have really different sort of ways in which the national body in the 20th century has been constructed, but the similarities are in terms of what has been left out. I think you can definitely draw some spot-on connections.
Maybe an interesting case, could be Skansen.
Yeah.
Just how Skansen was created by collecting this heritage. Was a person who thought Swedish heritage is about to disappear. I need to start to collect. And he was literally knocking on the doors of people's houses saying, "Can I buy your house?" And then transfer that to Stockholm to create this bubble and the narrative of this is our heritage. That could be something, and he's the guy who also started the Nordiska Museet as well. So yeah, stuff.
Yeah, but instead, maybe following your question of how can we bring this back.
This is what I need. The most important
to Sweden, and I'm a bit wondering if, and you sort of follow this by saying Sweden was not part of the war since 200 years, and then there is also this almost feeling that colonialism was not in Sweden, while I think that here where we should sort of more elaborate. What does that mean? And when, for example, I was in Boden, people were convinced that the war never arrived, while they, since 50 years, they are receiving what is the side effect of the war. I mean, all refugees arriving there, and the whole narration is that we never had a war. And in a sense, I think that there is a lot to do here in terms of how Palermo can speak with Sweden, how Palermo can speak with Boden in order to understand what is really the heritage there. And as long as we see this as a place that never witnessed war and then another place with that heritage, and that they are unable to speak together because they think that they don't have commonalities, is what needs to be sort of taken into consideration, I believe, and to stop thinking that there is less need for decolonization in a space like Sweden, because I think that there is a huge need for decolonization in many ways, and colonialism was part of the whole DNA of that place. Maybe the attitude was a bit different, but nevertheless, I mean, in in that sense, if you would go to a place like Boden, you would feel that Sweden was heavily part of this war by being neutral. But by being neutral, you are also part of this war. It doesn't mean that you have the hands clean. No? And this is maybe, I hope.
And this is definitely, this is why I asked the question, how can this come back? I mean, this kind of approach, that you need this more here. Because as you say, we have that kind of narrative, that we have been outside of this, but we have been part of that. So that's why I would like to have this kind of more here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've been discussing how we're gonna make this connection, and one of the connections that we thought is the ZEN, the public housing, and also discuss the welfare state and housing program here that we also presented before, and try to understand similarities. But yeah, we don't know yet how to bridge. But we are aware that we are here in Stockholm, and then suddenly it's not that we are totally only in Palermo, and then the things are connected. And if we are working from here, and even if we are going there, we are bringing things from here there, and bringing things from there here, because we are also in this traveling. Yes, we are also in this traveling.
Well, then I guess we can move to a kind of where you